everybody. Welcome to InPsightRadio. I am your host, Danielle Egnew, and you are a fly on the wall to everywhere. How is everybody this week? I hope you took last week's homework and plugged it all in and had yourself cooking with gas and had yourself reevaluating how not to boil yourself like a frog 1 degree at a time. And that when things in our life are actually adjusted in the noodle. I mean, we've got this gray matter in our head, which literally creates the world in which we dwell. So perception is everything. It's a crazy thing. So I hope your perception has been better this week, or even if it's not better, I honest to God, it's not the freaking consciousness Olympics over here. Okay. I am just hoping that you had a fantastic week implementing all kinds of cool stuff, because that's really what it's all about. And speaking of cool stuff, I am so excited to have in the studio a wonderful guest. Now, she's been on the show before, and her name is Melissa Scianna. You will know Melissa from many places if you follow my work. You will know her as the production manager for the Road Angel TV show that we're shooting. You'll also know Melissa as the owner of Vintage Apothecary in Bridger, Montana. She is an herbalist. She is a healer. She is an enthusiast of all things Montana. And actually, we're going to talk today about some really cool stuff. And the cool stuff has to do with beings that live out in the area around where Melissa lives, out in Bridger, Montana, and in the Pryors. We get to talk all about the actual elementals and the little people and what's out in the Pryors. Melissa, hi!
Hey!
It's so good to have you.
It's so fun to be here. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for coming on, and I am actually super excited to have you. So I was super excited to have you because you're fun, first of all.
Thanks.
Secondly, I was super excited to have you because you live out in the Pryor mountain range area. And that doesn't mean anything to any listener who is not from Montana. So explain the Pryors, explain where you live, and explain why the Pryors are so cool.
So the Pryors, not being a geologist, I know there's geological specific things about the Pryors that make them unique, and I don't know the details of that, but they're a super old mountain range. It's a small mountain range. I mean, there's just maybe a couple of big peaks in the Pryor Mountains, and they're a little bit isolated. So they're not really attached to the Rocky Mountains at all. There's valleys all around them, so they're isolated from every other mountain range, and they're older. They're a different age than the mountain ranges, so they're very unique. They're also isolated from visitors a little bit. Well, in the last, 10 years, we're starting to get a few more people there, but historically, they've been very isolated from tourists and travelers, and there hasn't been a lot of human activity up there. Another super cool thing about the Pryors is that they are home to a band of wild horses that are thought to have originated with the Spanish.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Is that the Mustangs up there? Mm-hmm. Oh, mm-hmm. That's completely
And again,
cool.
I don't have all the science on that, but they have certain physical characteristics, like a dorsal stripe, that is only found on horses that are directly bloodline descended from the Spanish stallions.
Okay, so you got these really super cool Spanish stallion descendants, which we know as the wild Mustangs and the Pryors. Mm-hmm. And for anybody who needs to understand the construction of a mountain range, obviously when the plates come together, they push up mountains, right? And the Pryors are unique because they have this slope to them. It's like literally like somebody took one end of the ground and propped it up with a stick, and the other end, like a lean-to, just kind of goes down into the ground. They're a very fascinating shape with many of the mountains. And the other thing about the Pryors that are so cool and is so weird, there isn't a lot of water.
Wait, I was just going to say that. That's so true.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we're so used to seeing so much water in the mountain ranges in Montana, and the Pryors are really unique that there's not a lot of streams and mountain ranges at all.
Right.
Another cool thing, there's so many cool things about the Pryors.
Right.
And I guess the point with all that preamble that I said was just to show how isolated they are.
Yes.
I mean, the stallions are pure because there's nowhere else for them to go.
Right.
Because it's so isolated. So,
right.
So there's no water. There's not much water. Another super cool thing is that there are all these caves up there. And several of them are ice caves with, with ice in them that's hundreds of years old.
Actually, more than
older.
Hundreds. The ice in the ice caves up in the Pryors, and for anybody who's like, what's an ice cave? It's literally a cave that has glacial ice in it. Mm-hmm. So when the glaciers came through here 10,000 years ago, that ice was pushed underground, it was pushed into ground, and because it's deep in these cave systems, big limestone cave systems, if I'm not mistaken, up in the Pryors, which you've got these glacial ice caves, and some of that ice, most of that ice is 10,000-year-old glacial ice. So you'll see things frozen in it that were frozen 10,000 years ago. Now, why have we spent the first 5 minutes of the show talking about the Pryor Mountains? Because we've now talked about how isolated they are. We have now talked about the fact that there's not very much water in them, so they're not really hospitable to people. We've talked about the fact that they've got water, but frozen in ice caves up there. And we went hiking around an ice cave. If you go on my Facebook page or Melissa Scianna's Facebook page, you'll see me, Melissa. Melissa, of course, is also my sister-in-law. She is married to my wife's sister. I know that sounds like a TV plot for a bad Netflix 22-minute comedy, but it's the truth. So, you'll see family camping pictures up there. Yet the reason we're talking about the Pryors is because the Pryor Mountain Range is an exceptionally holy and sacred place. And I'm going to kick this to you in 1 second, Melissa, but just to set this up for you. If you go wandering around the Pryors, there are fossils that are just laying everywhere. They're laying on top of the ground. It's crazy. There are petroglyphs, which of course are it's like a cave painting, except they're carved into the rock. And there are also paintings on the rocks with berries and whatnot of ancient tribal peoples, and lots of UFOs coming and going. And it's the home of the little people. So what can you tell us about the little people, Melissa?
So there's a lot of things about the little people. They're a Crow tradition, so a Crow tribal legend. So, every culture has legends of little people, and our Montana legend is the little people of the Pryors. And so we see, there's so many things we see. We see petroglyphs that look more recent that we think perhaps are things that the little people carved.
Wow.
We have a tradition. This is super cool because we live in the foothills of the Pryors, just outside the foothills of the Pryors.
Right.
And we actually have little people where we live in our backyard.
How do you detect the little people? Now, for those of you who might not be, they're like, what is a little person? We're talking about elemental beings. Mm-hmm. And elemental beings they can range from Bigfoot. Sasquatch is an elemental. We also think of fairies or fae or the elfin folk or the Siddha. If you are Celtic, that's people of the mounds. Or in this case, you've got the Crow Nation that talks about the little people. Lewis and Clark documented the little people.
Yeah.
They were coming up the Missouri, and they were getting ready to cut up there and go up the Yellowstone and do their thing. And they actually wanted their Native American guide to take them to one of those, I wish they could take us, to one of those mounds where the little people were said to live, and the Native Americans wouldn't take them because they freaked out. And they said, no, if we go with you, these little beings wounded 300 of our best warriors. And they're said to be about 18 inches tall or whatnot. So is this, when you say you have little people around your property, how do you know?
I think that, sometimes you can see things moving out of the corner of your eye.
Oh, that's
right?
cool.
And that happens all the time. And you look and there's nothing there.
Like a blur or like a rock moving?
Well, both.
Wow.
So yeah, a lot of times it's just like you can see motion out of the corner of your eye. And it could be anything, I suppose. But it just so happens that, you know, like if you have any intuition at all, you know when there's a little person around.
Right.
And as a person that harvests plant material, and some of the Pryors have some of the most unique plant material and plant species there, but you are you just know intuitively that you must use respect and take care when you're harvesting plant material. It just feels like it's not respectful and not safe, and you won't get a positive effect from the medicine that you use, that you make out of the plant material. Yeah. Yeah.
So pretty much you can kind of feel them, you can vibe them. Have you ever seen one? Nobody ever sees them. I mean, I've seen one through poison ivy one time.
Yeah, I was with you. I remember that.
Yeah, you kind of saw that happen as I'm running back to the boat. But I've never actually seen one. But, you know, when we talk about the Little People Gang, it's not just a bunch of legends and lore at all. In fact, even locals in Bridger, Montana, they talk all the time about the little people, how you don't want to mess with the little people, how you don't want to be disrespectful of the little people. And we're talking ranchers and all kinds of things that are gnarly. So
Yeah.
do explain Bridger, though, to people who are listening.
So Bridger's a farming ranching community, and it just so happens that we don't have very many Native Americans living there. So the Native Americans aren't really sharing their legends with us so much.
Right.
But I will tell you that my children go up to the Pryors. It's like an hour from our house, and to party and to hike and to camp and to do all the things that you do in the mountains, you know. But those kids, those very non-traditional kids, they were just regular teenagers that played football and volleyball, you know. And they never once would go up there without a gift to leave for the little people. It's so much a part of our culture because of where we live that it's ingrained in even the children that they must be respectful. They must leave a gift when they go to the Pryors. I think that they have a certain degree of fear.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, if you are not familiar with elemental beings, you don't understand how they feel. And that's why I was asking you, how can you tell when they're around? Because I can feel them.
Yeah.
And they feel like eerie.
Yeah.
They feel eerie.
Oh, don't you think that different elementals and different places feel differently?
Oh, yeah.
Too. It's not that all, I don't necessarily feel that all elemental beings feel eerie, but
that's kind of racist of me. I shouldn't say that.
I will say that the little people, the Pryors, definitely demand respect.
Yes.
They feel like they demand respect.
Well, yes, they do. They do demand respect, and to the point where there's a lot of crow lore about what happens to you if you overhunt, if you overfish, if you are disrespectful to the land. There's a lot of it. And I mean, even ranchers, you know, and I say this, even ranchers, because if you're not from a rural state like Montana, you may not know the rancher personality. So if you watch shows like Yellowstone, you're going to see Kevin Costner as a very wealthy rancher. But we're talking gritty ranchers down in Bridger. And these are guys that don't believe in ghosts unless it's a tribal area. There is some superstition there, but these are salt of the earth people.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very much. They're just people that live, not at all like Kevin Costner. They live in regular houses like us. They go out every day and take care of their cows and plow their crops. And they're actually just like exactly how you would imagine the American farmer or rancher to be,
like
you know,
salt of the earth dudes and women.
Yeah.
So these guys they even know that the little people are to be respected. So when we wrap this around to the Pryor Mountains, to the little people, to Lewis and Clark documenting, they called them little devils, that they were not allowed to approach the mound of, which I think this is interesting, the mound of, because then you've got people all the way around the world in Ireland calling these people Siddha or fair folk or fairies, the people of the mounds. So there's a lot about these beings living under the ground and living in the ground. And people have seen these beings. You know, I have a cousin. my cousin Nathan, actually, was out hunting. And Nathan is a good old boy. You know, he shoots things with his crossbow and, you know, whatever. And he was hunting with a buddy. And there was a downed elk that they had gotten across this, I guess it was a gully that they had to really climb down and climb back up. And this was right around that Pryor Mountain area. And this was years and years ago. And they went to go pull the elk out. And elk are huge. I mean, they're humongous animals. So how big would you say, okay, folks out there know how big a horse is, right? How big would you say an elk is compared to a horse?
I'm not sure, but I think an elk is probably a little bigger than a horse.
It is. It is quite a bit bigger than a horse. I mean, it's many hands higher than a horse.
It's taller, yeah, for sure.
Taller, longer legs, longer body, nastier temperament.
They're huge.
They're big. Not as big as a moose, but they're really big.
Close.
Yeah, they're close. So my cousin Nathan was looking, you know, at this downed elk, and all of a sudden it started like dragging itself. But they knew they shot it. They shot it through the lungs and the heart. It came down. They were really excited. And all of a sudden, they saw this, its head, was up off the ground. And it would, go up. And then the body would drag forward. And it would go up. And the body... And they could not figure out how the heck this elk was pulling itself. Because they couldn't see its feet moving or anything. Finally... They saw as it cleared, it was kind of on a ledge, and they cleared, the elk cleared this rock ledge, and all they could see was a being from the waist down, maybe a foot worth of view, that had its little tiny arm up around, and it had this elk's head over its shoulder. So they couldn't see its face. They saw its hand and its other hand over its snout, and it was pulling the elk by its head. Now, elk weigh hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds. And this thing was dragging the elk along.
Wow.
And my cousin and his friend were just like, oh my God, it's the little people. And they didn't go after it.
Yeah.
They didn't bug it. They let the little, and the thing was, I think they may have been hunting. I don't think they weren't poaching. They had a license. But they were, I think, hunting with something that made it real easy for them to kill the elk. You know, it wasn't much of a hunt, so to speak. So the little people came and took the elk.
Wow.
Because they weren't going to let them have it.
Well, and they definitely have a reputation for being formidable. So strength makes sense. They're wily, you know. And I think the reason, the legends about leaving gifts and stuff and being respectful of them come from literally a fear of you might not get home tonight if you don't leave a gift.
Oh, it's
that's what the kids say.
Well,
you
yeah.
know? They're like, yeah, Mom, we left a gift. We would still be there if we didn't, you know?
Well, and so can you tell our listeners, do you happen to know, I know a bunch, but people don't want to listen to me talk right now. How do you explain, what is some of the lore that you know around the little people and how difficult they can make it for people to get around?
Oh, I think that they're mischievous.
Yeah.
But dangerous at the same time. I don't generally ever feel afraid of them because I am always so full of respect for anything that I take, you know.
Right.
But I think that, I think that they have the potential to take cattle. There's areas up there where people run cattle on BLM land and in Forest Service land too.
Heck yeah.
And I think that those, and I know the people that run up there, and they are extremely respectful.
Yeah.
Because they know that they could lose a very valuable piece of livestock if they're not.
Well, and this is the other thing is my grandmother, Dorothy Egnew, was the director of welfare for Crow Agency. So we hung out a lot in Hardin, and I got to hear a lot of really great stories. My dad is from Hardin, Montana, little bitty town it just borders the Crow Nation, the Crow Reservation. And that's where my granny worked for when she was the director of welfare. And what I thought was so interesting was I heard about the little people all the time from my granny and my grandpa. And we'd go up to Bighorn Canyon, and we've been up there with, our friends Wayne and Holly, and you and your wife Sarah, and my wife Rebecca, the two sisters. And we've been up there, and when you're up there, that is a sacred place for the little people. That's like little people church
Yeah.
And they flooded it. They dammed it up and they flooded it. So one of the most acute places for me to feel the little people, that's in the Bighorn Mountains, is the bottom half of the lake in the Pryors, or is it just the Bighorns?
So, no, I think that if you're standing on the top of the Pryors, you look down into the Bighorn Canyon.
That's what I thought. Like
it's totally attached to both the Bighorns and the Pryors. I think that it's the same little people that are in the canyon as are in the Pryors for sure.
Oh, I would absolutely agree. So if you've never been to Bighorn Canyon, go online and Google Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area. It basically looks like if you flooded the Grand Canyon. It's stunning. It's amazing. And regrettably, I'm sure it was even more stunning before they put 500 feet of water in it because of the depth and everything. So the little people are all over the place in Bighorn Canyon.
They seem, also in Bighorn Canyon, the little people seem perhaps more serious.
Oh, they're a little riled.
Pryors.
Yes.
Yeah, they're a little more angry. And I don't think they actually really want anyone in Bighorn Canyon.
I don't think they do either. I think they get mad. I think they get owly. And one of the best stories that I've got about the little people living up in the Pryors and whatnot is that when we were all up on a boat, you and Sarah, I think, were sleeping in the bow of the boat, if I'm not mistaken. And that was a little rough. And, we ended up sleeping, I don't know where the heck I was sleeping, on the dock or something. I don't even remember.
You guys were sleeping on the dock. Yep.
Okay. And you could hear, the first time I've ever stayed in Bighorn Canyon, you could hear the flutes going back and forth between these little people playing carved flutes. And it would echo through the canyon. And you got to understand, gang, it's not like people are in the canyon. I mean, you can't get in there except for 2 ways in. Well, there's 3 ways. You can get in through Lovell, Wyoming. You can get in through Oka Bay in Montana. Or you can get in through, there's one like little middle launch place. But that's it. So, and it's a giant lake. And it's steep canyon walls all the way to the water.
Yeah, like hundreds of feet tall canyon walls.
Big time.
Yeah.
So the little people are out there, and they are more serious because you freaking dammed up all this water.
Yeah, I think they're still angry about that for sure.
I am sure they're angry. Okay. Go. You go.
No, tell your story,
I know what you're going to say. No, you go first because I know what you're going to say.
I'm just thinking about last summer.
Yes.
After we had been in Yellowtail, it's almost like
Yellowtail Dam is Bighorn Canyon.
Yeah, Bighorn Canyon. By the end of the season, they get darn sick of having people around.
Yeah.
And by the end of the boating season, there starts to be lots of accidents. Like, people get lost in there. People need to be rescued in there. And that started happening last year towards the end of the season. And our friend that has the boat, he just said, we were talking about it, and he's like, yeah, we are not going back this year. They're done. It's time to be done boating for this year now.
Yeah, if you wait too long and you go towards the end of the season, they really do get sick of it. Now, why are the elementals gnarly? Well, it's not because they're ill-tempered. It's because people are freaking clueless. We're clueless. There's a reason. Bigfoot's an elemental. There's a reason why we can't find Bigfoot when Bigfoot dies. It's because Bigfoot doesn't lay down on the ground and die and rot. They are elemental beings, so they go through vortex portals. We like to call those fairy rings. They go through a fairy ring, and they end up in their particular dimension, and elementals travel interdimensionally, and they travel along those natural occurring ley lines. So Bigfoot is an elemental. These little people are an elemental. That's how they disappear and reappear in, quote, thin air, and you'll find them. You will find them intolerant of clueless humans who do things like in Bighorn Canyon and Yellowtail Dam, who throw cans in this gorgeous canyon, who dump their garbage over the edge. I mean, human beings are disgusting. We are conscienceless when it comes to the earth. And so,
well, we were talking about how the little people demand respect, and it's not even so much about them demanding respect for themselves.
Right.
What they're demanding is respect for the earth.
Heck yeah.
And it's really not about leaving them gifts,
right,
as much as it's about if you cleaning up after yourself, or like, for me, a plant person, it's about not harvesting everything. It's about asking permission and just taking a small piece of things, you know? They are all about protecting the earth.
And little people, it's very important to note, They are God's middle management, Mother, Father, God's middle management for nature. So we are clueless about nature. We humans come in and we ravage and we terraform. And especially, sorry, white Western European people, we have a lot of off-worlder in us genetically. And what do off-worlders love to do? Well, especially if you're from the Sirius AB, you love to explore and you love to terraform. You love to tear up the earth. You love to build it in your image. You like to build great big pyramids at Giza. You love to transform the earth into your image. And as I say on this podcast all the time, you don't see a bear doing that.
Right.
You really don't. You never saw the Native American populations doing that. Welcome, white Western Europeans, to your Sirius AB bloodline. You're all terraformers. We're all terraformers. So this is why the little people get mad. And, to tell a quick story about that, the boat wreck.
Yeah.
You were thinking about that, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see the boat wreck up in the air there. So Melissa's sitting across from me in the studio, and I'm looking at her thought process in her crown chakra here. There was a very tragic boat accident, and it was bad last summer. The summer of 2018. And it was exceptionally tragic. And a boat ran head on, like full speed ahead, into a canyon wall. Now, you kind of might wonder how that's possible for a boat to run dead on, going full tilt. Not that it clipped the canyon wall. It wasn't trying to go around a corner and it accidentally caught something in the water. It kamikaze smashed right into the canyon wall. And one of the things that happens in Bighorn Canyon is that, and the little people, and that's why I asked earlier if you saw rocks move with the little people,
Oh, you have a rock moving story.
I certainly do. I absolutely do. In Bighorn Canyon, they are said, the little people, the lore is that they can move the stones. They can move canyon walls. And that may sound absolutely ridiculous, but it's true. They do. They move the canyon walls. And so the people who unfortunately had this god-awful accident, there was only one survivor, and the poor man, he was the man who was driving the boat. And they'd had some cocktails, and they were out there partying and doing whatever. And the gentleman, which is really tragic, who was driving the boat, hit the wall so hard that there were people sitting in the front of the boat, the bow of the boat. They instantly died, because imagine running into literally a limestone wall at 70 miles an hour. Just boof, that was it. And he he hit the wall so hard, it actually threw his eyes out of his eyeball sockets.
I did not hear that.
Yeah, it's very, very sad, the poor guy. It actually threw his eyes out of his eyeball sockets, and he is blind. He lived, but he's blind. Yeah. So that poor man is never going to be driving a boat again, and of course he is devastated because the boat sank in this area that was, hundreds of feet deep, and the boat was probably 90 feet underwater, and it had, of course, the bodies of these poor people in it.
Yeah.
And he just kept saying, I effed up, I effed up, I effed up. He kept saying it over and over again, and he kept mentioning that he didn't know where the wall came from. Now, granted, he was drinking on the lake, but I'm guessing this gentleman probably was not so inebriated that he could not see a massive monolithic wall right in front of him, And so, because there's a ton of people in Bighorn Canyon that party. Mm-hmm. And we saw that when we were up there.
Yeah.
People drunk and being stupid and whatever. But, the little people do move things. And before I tell my moving things story, have you guys in Bridger ever had anything moved in your yard?
Oh, yes, all the time. So even this spring, an example was that I was gardening. And I had a bunch of seed packets. I had like 3 seed packets. And one of them happened to be basil. And I just was planting my stuff. And I looked. And the basil packet was gone.
Out of your pocket?
It was in my pocket. Yes. So then I just was like, I had only been in like a 5-foot area. So
right, you weren't running up and down the hill.
No, I wasn't running up and down the hill. And I looked all over the place, and it was nowhere to be found. And then, like 2 weeks later, I want to say. It was quite a while later. There it is, right on the back porch.
Just sitting on the back porch?
Yeah. On the back steps. Or like on the grill, in the back of our house. It was on the grill.
On the grill?
Yeah. Just like, it's just a place where we put things.
Like somebody came and put it back?
Yeah.
Okay, what kind of basil was it?
It was just a mix of basil, which I planted and is growing amazingly well this summer.
Well, I'm wondering if they wanted some of it. So
I know. I do. I think that they just often remind you, especially like the back behind our house is wild.
Oh, it is.
And I know, like, if I'm sitting outside in the evening, you can feel the elementals around you. So I think that they just remind you. They were just reminding me, like, hey, don't forget us. You're planting plants. We're all about the plants.
Are you going to give them some of your basil?
I probably think I better, don't you?
Man, I would. These guys are harsh. They're harsh. I would totally leave them some basil somewhere. The reason I was asking about that, so somebody could be hearing this story, a skeptic could be hearing this story and saying, well, you dropped it out of your purse.
It's so true.
And a bird put it right back on your grill.
Except for there's like hundreds of stories like that.
Oh, I know.
So that's just an example.
Yeah. And I remember, so I get this phone call, this text, the little people took my basil packet. I'm like, they took your basil packet? She said they took my basil packet. So, but this is a thing they do, and they do remind you that you're there, that they are there. Mm-hmm. They do remind you to be respectful. Mm-hmm. And the thing that's fascinating is I grew up with these beings, and so I can feel them around. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually really, really drawn to the places where they live, and they live in rocks. If you've got rock faces, crevices, they like to live in those rocks. They go underneath the rocks. I think the sandstone in back of your house in Bridger, there's very interesting topography in about 125 square mile space in south central Montana. And in my hometown of Billings, it's this really cool topography where you've got these sandstone cliffs all over the place. And they jut up all over the place in Bridger. Mm-hmm. And you don't find that topography anywhere else in Montana except for that little area. I mean, it just looks like this. And it used to be crow country. So it was a very hallowed space.
Mm-hmm. And I also feel like that area surrounds the Pryors. So the Pryors are kind of central to that interesting topography.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the Pryors, you can feel the little people up there. When I was a kid, my grandpa Charlie, who was a title attorney, okay, he was the son of David Lehman Egnew from Indiana. And they had come out to Montana. And my grandpa Charlie was this Aries literal attorney. And he had a hilarious sense of humor, but he was very literal. And Grandpa Charlie, when we would go camping in the Pryors when I was a kid, he would tell me, he'd say, well, you better leave part of your Oreo cookie for the little people.
That's right.
And he'd say it kind of in a fun way. And at one time I said something like, well, what's going to happen if I don't leave it for the little people? And he kind of got a little bit serious, just a little weird. And he said, well, I wouldn't be the one to want to find out.
That's right.
Don't leave it the cookie for them, but they're going to come visit you in your tent. And I'm like, and I just knew it was true.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't want these 3 foot tall. They're small. They're 18 feet tall, or 18 inches tall. 18 feet is Bigfoot. And they are said to be, 18 inches, 24 inches, gray in color, round balded head. For those people who have seen them, they have wide set yellow or orange eyes. They've got pointy little teeth.
Yeah, that's the thing that I always remember is the pointy teeth.
Pointy little teeth, like little pin teeth, and a big wide mouth. And they've got kind of squatty necks, like what you would kind of think of a gremlin meets like not a troll, but like a not an ogre, like a gnome. That kind of looking thing, but with smaller features, because I'm told they have like real small noses, hardly any ears. They almost look alien-y, except for they're not an alien. Mm-hmm. So have you ever felt one that was right on top of you? Like you knew if you turned around, you were going to see it?
It's funny because I feel like they're there a lot of times. And I'm not afraid of them either, but it's when you were talking about them moving through what did you call it?
Vortexes. They move through vortexes and ley lines.
So I think that they do that a lot. I mean, there are so many ley lines crisscrossing that area around the Pryors that I think that they're probably, I mean, you may feel like there's one right next to you and you turn around and it's not there. They're very quick, for one thing. And also, I think they're moving in and out of those vortexes. So it's super hard to see them.
Well, it is super hard.
But I think they're all over the place where I live.
They are all over the place. And I'm really drawn to areas where they are because the areas where they are feel sacred. It feels like when you go into a cathedral, that feeling in a beautiful cathedral, that's what Bighorn Canyon feels like. That's what that massive, hill up the back of your house that's all covered in sandstone at the top.
Yes.
That feels like a cathedral to me. And it's just vaulting up there. And the little people, I think, feel very sacred. I think their resonation is very sacred. I think their culture is very sacred. They go back to the original, that was basically like 12 or 13 main fae families or fairy families, elemental families, and they're part of that. They're part of that genus of beings, which is really amazing. And the thing about moving rocks is, one time Rebecca and I were up camping, again, up in, Bighorn Canyon, and I don't think you guys were there that summer.
No.
This was the summer before you guys went with us. And Rebecca and I were sleeping on the back of the boat, and there was this rock that looked like a thumb, a very large rock. It had to be about 4 stories tall, and it was just eroded to look like a thumb. And we were laying on the back of the boat, and pretty soon the boat, all of a sudden the moon was in my face, and then it wasn't in my face. It was completely cloudless sky. Then the moon was in my face, and it wasn't in my face. Well, I kind of opened my eyes because after a while it occurred to me it was really weird that the moon kept appearing and disappearing with no clouds. I'm like, that's super weird. So then I thought, okay, well, the boat must have come loose because we were moored very tightly onto a dock. And it was like an outhouse out there, a floating outhouse. And we'd moored very, very tightly. And the floating outhouse was cabled to the canyon wall. So it wasn't like it was free floating. Like it didn't move. It could support all kinds of boats going onto it and whatnot. So I'm laying on the back of the boat and I'm looking up at the stars and I see the edge of the outhouse in reference to the stars. And I'm on the boat, right? So if we're moving, I should be seeing the stars moving in back of the outhouse roof, right? But the moon is moving. It's bright and then it's not bright, but we're not moving. Like the sky is exactly the same. Nothing's moving. We are tight to that dock. The dock's not moving. It's still, you could hear a pin drop. And finally, I hear my wife, who's extremely practical. She says, "Why does the moon keep appearing and not appearing?" She'd woken up too. And that dang giant 4-story tall thumb rock, it was moving. And it would move out in front of the moon. Then it would move back out of the way of the moon, just enough. And I was looking at that, and I'm like, "Rebecca, are you looking at this? Are you?" And she's like, "How is that happening? How is that?" It wasn't us. We weren't moving. Everything was static. Nothing in the sky was changing except for the moon. And I doubt it was the moon moving. So then our friend Wayne, who is like this, how would you describe Wayne?
Wayne is very authentic. He's big and very opinionated. He has a heart of gold, but he's kind of your salt of the earth guy, right?
Oh, yeah. He's like a John Wayne, 6'6".
Yeah.
Huge.
Loud,
blustery. He calls me, Agnew, what are you doing up there? This just great big guy. And so I'm like, "Wayne," because he was sleeping on the dock. "Are you awake, Wayne?" I said, Can you see the rock moving? The rock is moving. And he goes, "Agnew, go to sleep. I don't want to talk about it right now." Because he knew damn well what was going on. He was watching it too, and it freaked him right out. He didn't want to talk about it. So they have the ability to move space-time. They work with the earth and the natural vortex points to fold space. And it seems like they are moving rocks. Yet they're actually contracting and expanding space-time. And it's what they do. They are the stewards of the earth.
And I think that is just part of the answer to your question. Do you ever see them? Well, no, because they don't want to be seen. You can feel them around you. I mean, like I can feel them sometimes. That bush that's 10 feet away, I know that there's there's one behind that bush, but you never see them because they don't want you to.
No.
If you do see them, it's because they're trying to make a point.
They are trying to make a point. So the only time I ever saw one behind the poison ivy was when I was fishing. Were you guys there that summer?
I don't know, but you're a little quicker than most people. Like you probably can see them psychically. Like you're close, you know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah.
Like most people, yeah. You kind of have like an edge up on most of us.
Well, I mean, literally, I looked. So I was over there fishing in this little alcove, and again, you have to understand, you guys, it's not like a big flat lake with a sandy beach. It is limestone cavernous walls that go straight into the water. Okay, and then they go down for 200 feet or 500 feet. It's an exceptionally deep lake. So the only way you can get out there is on a boat. And you can kind of crawl up on these shale, crumbly, they're not even banks. It's just where everything crumbles, you know. And I was up there and I had to use the restroom. So I was using the restroom around the corner and, you know, deciding where I was going to, you know, fish and whatever. And I was maybe, I don't know, 50 feet from the boat. I wasn't that far, but I was around a bush. And I heard this rustling up above me. Now you have to understand, if you grew up in Montana, we're not weirded out by rustling brush. We know what, you know, there's animals and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Crap lives in the woods. It's not a big deal. And so I'm going to the bathroom and I hear rustle. And I thought, okay, it could be anything. It could be a raccoon, a rabbit. Where I was, there was not enough room for a large animal like a bear. It couldn't get up there because it was too shaly. But then, the hair on just the back of my neck just started raising. And like, you know, when you walk into a room and you're creeped out and you want to put your shoulder blades together, like you suck your neck in like a turtle and you want to put your shoulder blades together. And at this point, I'm like, oh my God, there is a little person and it's got to be 10 feet behind me and it's looking right at me. So I turn around and I see this gray figure that was about 18 inches tall because you can kind of see through that patchy poison ivy up there.
Yeah.
And it's moving, but it's not moving like an animal on 4 legs. It's bipedal. It's moving on 2 legs. And I can see these little legs moving, these stumpy little legs. And I just freak the frick. I freaked out, man. I tell you what, there's something about those beings that scare the crap out of me. I mean, I would rather deal with a demon. There's just something about them. They are so powerful and wild.
Yeah.
Wild. And they're not on my same rule system spiritually. So I have no way to really communicate with that being necessarily. And I'm a person and I'm of Western European terraformer descent. So I've got all this off-worlder in me and the little people and the off-worlders, not so much.
That's so interesting because I don't feel the same way about them that you do. And I wonder if that is representative of what our actual genome is, or you know what I'm saying?
Are you saying I'm an alien?
Maybe.
Well, great.
Maybe a little bit.
Be quiet, man. My zipper's going to show in the back. I've been trying to grow my hair out. Come on.
Just curious. It was a question.
No, it's a good question because I don't feel intimidated by them as a race. Like I don't want to wipe them out. I don't have that weird thing.
No.
But I do feel weirded out by them. Like just freaked out by them. Like I just want to say, I want to put my hands in the air and say, uncle, uncle, uncle. So I'm seeing this thing in the brush and I start running back to the boat. So as I'm running, it's running. It's like paralleling me, except I have to get around a tree, poison ivy, don't fall in the lake. There's shale falling everywhere. And I go hauling my happy butt right up over the boat. And I'm hauling my butt back and I'm looking at this thing. The faster I run, the faster it runs. And I can feel it. It thinks it's hilarious. It thinks it's hilarious that I'm hauling ass. And I'm just like, oh my God, you think this is funny? This isn't funny. And I run up and the poison ivy gets real thin towards the edge, you know? And all of a sudden I can actually physically see, it wasn't psychically, I was looking right at it. This little gray, I can see its little legs, little stumpy legs, and its little fists and its little hands and are pumping and it's running. And just if that thing was going to come right out and look at me because that was going to be heavy, funny for it.
Yeah.
And I saw it running. And just as I saw it, like I saw its shoulder clear there and I just looked away. I'm like, nope, no. I looked away from it because I thought if I look at that thing, and I look into it and I could see it. Like then I could see, then it looked at me in my mind's eye. And I'm like, you guys are a-holes. God, I'm trying not to look at you. And it had these yellowy orange eyeballs. And it just looked at me, like through me, you know? So but I wasn't going to look at it. And I go flying into the boat. And Holly, our friend, you know, she's married to Wayne. You could look up Holly. I talk about her a lot on the podcast. She's going to be a guest on an upcoming podcast. Holly Shaver, you can see her on In the Light of Cancer. She's my friend that we talk all the time about how she cured herself of stage 4 cancer without chemotherapy, just with her food and water and herbal treatments.
She's absolutely my hero. She's amazing.
She's an amazing person. So that's the Holly I'm talking about. So I go hauling into the boat, and I'm screaming and yelling, and I'm yelling, little people, little people, little people. And I get into the boat, and a rock is hucked off the side of the cliff where I was into the water. And it wasn't like, oh, a rock fell off the cliff. I mean, this rock was about the size of a small volleyball. And it flew at a very steep angle. You know, it didn't fall and bounce and like, oh, a rock came off. It was hucked like it was shot out of a cannon, and it hit the water, and the water just made this massive splash. And 2 seconds later, Holly's son Jackson, who was fishing, caught a catfish. And why this is relevant at all is because the year before I was trying to be up there. I was in that same canyon. I was trying to catch a catfish. We left treats. Nothing happened. And it was just, that's high elemental humor.
Yeah. Yes. They're mischievous. Right?
God.
Yeah, perhaps sometimes it's not that they're even trying to make a point. They just think you're funny.
They were just punking me. And I was the one who had gone clear up there. I had the moon pie. I had the Twizzlers. I had the gifts that I poured out on the side of the bank and then used the bathroom. Not on the gifts, of course. But this was the thing. And I think they were saying, thank you for the gifts. Thank you. But I couldn't believe it. I mean, I honestly, and to this day, I've had people say, do you regret that you didn't look at it? Because it was going to show itself to me. And I said, no, because I think it knew I wouldn't look at it. Yeah. It knew.
Yeah. I think they're saying, thank you for the gifts, but we don't play by your rules.
Thank you for the gifts. Pick up your toilet paper, biatch. Yeah. That's kind of what was going on. I was just like, ah! And I was out of there. It was nuts. So these are real beings. I've physically seen them. They are in the lore of this area. Tell me again, you started to talk about the petroglyphs up in the Pryors.
Oh, so this is kind of an interesting story. And this is in the, not necessarily in the mountains, but when we say the Pryors, we're also talking about the foothills around the Pryors. Yeah. Which is kind of a lower area. But we do a lot of hiking out there. There's lots and lots of BLM land out there, like hundreds of miles to hike on. And we were hiking in a spot that just had not been frequented by people. So it was a little bit remote, just in a weird spot. There wasn't a trail that went there. The first time I was by myself. And I do think when you get out there and you're by yourself, you can feel, it's easier to feel that holy spiritual quality.
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
And it was early in the morning, and I just, like before work, I just went out there to go for a hike. And I was drawn to this area. So there's this flat area with a beautiful view, and there's this giant rock behind it, like boulder, like as big as your house boulder, right? And I'm just drawn to go back there. There's some teepee rings around and stuff. It was clearly an important area.
So explain a teepee ring for listeners who would have zero reference for what that is.
So teepee rings, not really anything to do with elementals. As far as I know, I could be wrong. But teepee rings are just a ring of stones that you can find in areas where the Native Americans camped. And they were the theory is that they were the stones that hold the outside edge of the teepee down. So they would pull up their teepees and take off and leave the stones there.
Well, yeah. Can you imagine? That's a hell of a migratory path.
Yeah. A lot of the times the stones are like really buried because they were camps from hundreds of years ago. So they're not super easy to see. And that was the case here. But anyway, so I'm drawn to this rock, and I walk over to the rock, and there's just like a whole exposed rock face that's super smooth. And
you're talking about in that giant, huge house-size
giant, huge house-size boulder. Yeah, and there's petroglyphs, carvings in the rock of super cool things. One of them, I'm trying to remember, one of them looked like a cat So, and it had cat ears, and it was holding his hands up, and out of the tips of its fingers looked like there were flames.
What?
Yeah. And then there was also like a shield looking one. There were several of them. But the interesting thing about this is there were no historical carvings. So there were no names carved or dates carved or whatever.
So explain historical carving. So is that like if I was in the cavalry and I came through and carved my name in like 1886
or you
something
were
like that?
some snot-nosed teenager yesterday that carved a heart in there. It's any of that. Any of that.
Right on, okay.
So there was none of that there.
Okay.
And so I had taken some pictures of them, and then my wife Sarah is part of a group. I don't remember on Facebook where you can put up your pictures and they can like help you identify.
Oh, that's cool.
What it's a picture of an archaeology group, right?
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah,
I got to get on that group.
Well, she puts up the pictures. It's so interesting because here's the dichotomy about science and reality, which is so interesting. So she puts up the pictures, and even when I saw the carvings, I was like, these are super cool and very interesting, but they don't look crazy old. Right? So she puts them up, and the scientists that were looking at them said they're not that old. So I think some kid probably carved them. Well, honestly, they weren't anywhere where there was any kids. There was no trash around. There was no names carved. They were clearly not carved, and they were intricate and interesting. They weren't something. I see lots of stuff carved by kids, and it's usually hearts and initials and.
And I've seen that when we've all gone hiking as a family. And you guys have to understand, if you've never been to an area like the Pryors, it is freaking wild. It's not like, oh, look, there's this lovely path with logs on the side and there's chipped, stones and you're going to go. No, you're making sure not to step on thorns.
Rattlesnakes.
Oh, God. I almost stepped on a rattlesnake when we went out to Clark's Fork Canyon.
Yeah, the magnet.
Yeah.
They're everywhere.
Oh, and you almost stepped on a rattlesnake one time in the Pryors.
Yeah.
I was like, God, what's the deal with the rattlesnakes? Anyway, so, you just got to watch for stuff. So when Melissa says that this area was remote, gang, there are tons of other areas around Bridger where you see these rocks that are monument rocks, where you see carvings from the cavalry, you see carvings from somebody in 1956, you see, and everybody carves on them. So you're talking about something that was way the hell off the beaten trail.
Right. Also, one of the other carvings looked like Cocopelli, which was weird.
That is weird.
Which is not part of any of the tribes that have ever lived around here, to my knowledge. So our first thought was that they were Native American carvings, right?
Right.
And so then when we learned that they were newer, that they could possibly be newer than that, we were trying to figure it out. And we talked to you about it.
Yeah.
So what we thought was that they were actually carvings that the little people had carved there.
Well, and this is the thing, is that little people will carve stuff places to keep people out, or they will paint things on the side to keep people out. A really great example of this is the far western portion of Billings, Montana. Back in the 80s, there was this massive cave painting on the side of the rim rocks that looked out into a portion of the valley that we now call Ironwood, which is this extremely, for this area, you got to understand, for the area, a very fancy housing development, your 6 and 8 bedroom houses. And the irony is there's absolutely no water out in Ironwood. I mean, all of that water that you can drill and drill and drill, and you're not going to hit anything. The water table is so deep. So everything is city water piped out there. And before, this is in the 80s, long before any houses were out there, way back in the covey of Ironwood, where that big castle is now, actually, it was facing right where the castle is. Somebody built in Billings, Montana, a massive castle that has a helipad on it out of sandstone that they mined out of the rim rocks. And that was a tragic story. They didn't finish it. It was a guy, I guess he had a mistress, and he brought the mistress out there to look at the castle, and she freaked out and said she never wanted to go back. And I'm pretty sure a giant elemental scared her out of there.
Talk about not being respectful of the earth and making the little people mad.
Oh my God. I mean, they mined the rim rocks. You just don't do that.
No.
Anyway, the rims are these big sandstone cliffs. And in that same space, looking into Ironwood, on those cliff faces that now face where this big castle is, was this giant 6-foot painting that was on the sandstone. And the city of Billings in the 80s, like, painted a great big number 9 over the top of it because they were going to annex that. That was the 9th portion of the city they were going to annex, or some number. And somehow it was in the Billings Gazette. It got circulated around. There were archaeologists and anthropologists calling Billings from the Southwest. You talk about Kokopele, saying, you just painted over a 10,000-year-old sun god that is renowned. It was this face. It had big bulgy eyes and a squiggly mouth and a tongue sticking out and like squiggly sun rays. So it kind of looked like, graffiti of like a, spazzy face or something. Apparently that was a sun god, even down to the squiggly mouth and big eyes and whatever. And it was faded out. And they figured just some kids sprayed it with spray paint and it was wearing off. So I think that they said to the Billings city planners, that sun god was always over and looking into places that people were supposed to stay out of because they were inhospitable. Well, now we know Ironwood doesn't have any water. There's all these electromagnetic weirdo buildups out there in Billings. I remember out of nowhere, do you remember, was it last summer? A whole entire telephone pole exploded. The transformer exploded out of nowhere. They have no idea why.
Wow.
I mean, it just splintered and caught everything on fire. I mean, weird stuff happens out there. And I think the little people were the ones that were trying to speak common language and saying, hey, bulbous Western settler, terraformers, stay out of here because it's not hospitable. So when you talk about them carving into the rocks, I think they very much would carve into the rocks.
Yeah.
And especially something with flames coming out of its hand. I looked at that thing and it did not look like a kid did it.
Actually, and there's pictures of it on my Instagram or Facebook page if anyone wants to look at it.
And we can find you where?
Well, my Instagram is Scianna_vintage apothecary.
Okay.
And it's my personal Facebook, which is Melissa Scianna.
Okay. And so, if you want to see some of these pictures, hit Melissa Scianna, Scianna, Vintage Apothecary. You can check out everything that we've been talking about up there. And you can take a look at this thing. And it was not, I can tell you right straight out, it had 0 human resonance on it. That's my job to break down where things come from, right?
And I noticed when I was first there, I noticed that they didn't feel old, but I assumed they had to be. Because, but clearly I was wrong.
Well, and what I would tell you is I looked at that thing and it had like bat ears or cat ears and flames coming out of its fingers. And I looked at that going, are those horns? Because they looked kind of like horns. And then they had this thing on the inside or ears and then flames coming out of the hands. And I'm like, are there jinn out here? Because that's actually what jinn look like. And jinn are fire elementals. They're kind of rough. We could do a whole podcast on jinn, but we can also call them demons. People mistake jinn for demons all the time. And I looked at this thing with flames out of its hands and I'm like, ooh, there's obviously a vortex here. And maybe people shouldn't be in it because that's elemental's job is to keep us out of those vortex spaces.
Interesting.
It is very interesting. And we could go on and on and on. Okay, we've only got about 3 more minutes. And I just want to ask you, Melissa, is there any quick anecdote or piece of information that you want to leave our listeners with about the elementals and your experience with them?
Oh my gosh. I think, like I said before, they're always there. And I think the most interesting thing about this area that we live in is it is full of interesting things of elementals. Oh, here's one for you.
All right.
And so this is this is not a little people one.
Okay, that's okay.
So I don't know what this is. Maybe you can tell me.
Okay.
So my wife Sarah and I were hiking. It was in January. And
you were hiking in January in Montana?
Yeah, because the snowfall is super low in this area, in these Pryor foothill areas.
Okay.
So you can get out, and sometimes we'll have like 50-degree days in January.
Whoa.
So really, you can hike almost all year round. There was still snow on the ground, but it was cold. It was probably like 20 degrees, and we hiked far that day. We were probably 7 miles from the road.
Whoa.
That day.
You guys are hardcore, man.
That was a hardcore day.
Oh,
I
man.
think
Sarah's hardcore.
We may have almost died that day.
Okay.
But anyway, so we're way back in the back country, right? And there's still some snow on the ground. And we're walking along, and I look down, and there is a barefoot footprint.
Oh, I remember this.
Right in front of me, like a human-sized foot.
It was big.
Bigger than a human-sized foot. But it looked like a foot with the toe. You could see the toes. Extremely human-looking. Like a creature that walked on 2 feet. But it was 20 degrees, and it was in the snow, and it was barefoot.
And it was big.
So,
it was wide. I remember you guys took a picture of that.
Yeah, and we were talking about, I'm like, either there's somebody living out here, way back here, with really big feet and a really high cold tolerance, or
Yes.
this is something else.
Well,
so that's the craziest story.
You know, the Bigfoot, there have been tons of Bigfoot sightings in the Bighorns and the Pryors. And my same cousin, who is not full of weirdness, I mean, my same cousin Nathan, was telling stories about how another time they went out hunting and they couldn't get to the land because there were all these black SUVs that had blocked off all the access roads. And there was an old rancher down there drinking. And so they went to the bar because you couldn't get up to go hunting. And they said, what's the deal with all these black government SUVs blocking off everything? And the guy, this old gnarly guy, no teeth, I mean, just like a guy you'd think in a movie, right? He's sitting there drinking his whiskey. He's like, oh, they shot one of them Bigfoots again.
Oh, dang.
And like it was nothing. Oh, they shot one of them Bigfoots
I
again.
tell you what, this one, that time, that scared me. I wouldn't have wanted to be out there alone. Talk about getting a weird feeling vibe from something. That was a little scary.
Well, Bigfoot, they are elemental beings. They don't particularly like people messing with everything, and they're huge. They're huge. I remember seeing that footprint. And you guys, you have to understand, is that on your Facebook page too, that picture?
Probably.
Okay.
That was a while ago.
Well, last January.
It's way
But
back there.
Search January, everybody.
It would have been January, like 2018.
Yeah.
Probably.
Okay. Good to know, people. But I mean, I looked at that and I'm like, that's a freaking footprint. And it wasn't like an indentation in the snow. It wasn't like there was sometimes rabbits will burrow into the snow and the snow will fall in. It was a freaking footprint.
It was clearly a footprint.
Yeah. It was not my brain is making this into a footprint because I want to believe in Bigfoot. It was a freaking footprint.
Right.
In the snow.
And actually, my brain wasn't making it into anything. I honestly assumed that there was a weird human living out there at first until I thought about it a little.
With creepy deformed feet.
Right. With big giant human.
And with big wide deformed feet and splayed out toes. I was like, that's not normal looking. What the hell? All right, gang. Melissa and I could talk and share stories, but the point of this is elemental beings exist all over the planet. And if you're in the wooded areas, Michigan, Minnesota, those areas have tons of Bigfoot, tons of Sasquatch. So keep your eyes open for these beings. If you live in rocky areas, granite rocks, sandstone rocks, Louisiana down there with those limestone caves, tons of elementals. They're everywhere. They help us with everything that we need help with in this area. So very quickly, we're a little over time here, but I just want to thank you, Melissa, for being here. This is awesome. And Melissa is actually going to be planning these incredible nature walks where she can take you to all of these really great places and you can check out all of the elemental lore and fantastic fossils every place, and you can see some of these things that we've been talking about. She's going to have these nature walks up, coming up as the year goes on. So how can people find you, Melissa?
I actually have one of those on Sunday.
Fun.
This weekend.
Wow.
Yeah. It's vintageapothecaryshop.com. And then there's a book now tab, and you can see all the things you can book. I do group walks that I schedule ahead, and I also do private walks.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yep.
So if you guys
There's lots of options.
If anybody wants to book Melissa to actually go look at some of this stuff that you just cannot see anywhere else in the country, it's highly unique. I'm a paranormal investigator. I've gone to places all over the place, and I've never seen country like this. I've never seen phenomenon like this. And this is a very unique phenomenon in this area, and we do it respectfully. You're very respectful when you take people out.
Absolutely.
You're very respectful about it, and you're not trucking tons of people back there. So check out Melissa at Vintage Apothecary, everybody. And I am just going to go, nestle myself in and try not to have creepy dreams about elementals. All right, everybody, thanks so much for listening. Go educate yourself on the nature around you. Educate yourself on the types of elemental beings that are in your area. Make sure to go out and commune with nature. Bring them a gift. They like sweets. And remember, we as a human species, we are very new. We are a hybrid species. We are the third iteration of humans. That's what these angels call us. And as the third iteration of humans, these elemental beings are far older and they've been here a lot longer. And we have a lot to learn from them. So everybody, you go have a great time with the elementals. And if you actually look in their eyes, let me know. And I will see you next week.